Chapter 1. The Last Thing He Meant to Take. Walter Bennett had already written trash on the box when he saw his father's name scratched into the side of the old cassette player. Not written exactly. Cut in. Frank B. The letters were crooked, dug into the gray plastic with the impatience of a man who had never trusted labels to stay put. Walter stood in the half-cleared garage with the marker still in his hand, the black cap clenched between his teeth, and for a moment he forgot what he had been sorting. At 71, Walter had learned that leaving a house was mostly an argument with objects. The useful things went into Daniel's truck. The sentimental things went into boxes Walter pretended were useful. The broken things were supposed to go into contractor bags by the door, though every broken thing seemed to have a story that made it heavier than it looked. He had lived in this house for 38 years, raised one son in it, buried a wife from it, shoveled the same driveway until his knees began negotiating with him every winter morning. Now Daniel had decided the steps were too steep, the furnace too old, the neighborhood too quiet. And Walter had agreed because arguing took more energy than packing. Just for a while, Daniel had said. Walter knew what that meant, for as long as both of them could stand it. The garage smelled of dust, motor oil, cardboard, and old rain. A fluorescent tube buzzed above him, occasionally flickering like it was considering retirement too. Walter had been working since breakfast, separating screwdrivers from bent nails, coffee cans from mouse-chewed extension cords, coffee cans from other coffee cans because apparently a man could not own just one container of useless metal parts. The cassette player sat behind a stack of paint trays, half covered by a towel stiff with age. It was heavier than he expected when he picked it up. His father's things had a way of being heavier than they looked. Walter turned it over. The battery cover was cracked. One speaker grill was dented. A strip of masking tape had dried along the top, blank now except for a brown stain where writing had once been. Inside, behind the clear plastic window, a cassette waited with its reels uneven, as if someone had stopped it in the middle of saying something. He should have put it in the trash box. He had no reason to keep a cassette player. Daniel didn't even own a CD player anymore. Everything in his house came out of phones and little black speakers that answered when spoken to, which Walter found both impressive and rude. He thumbed the eject button. It stuck. Of course, he muttered. He pressed harder. The door popped open with a brittle click, and the cassette lifted slightly, still seated in place. No label, just a plain tape, yellowed at the edges. Walter saw, suddenly and without wanting to, his father at the old kitchen table. One blunt finger pressing record, another hovering over play, his cigarette burning in an ashtray with a chip on the rim. Frank Bennett had loved recording the radio, baseball games, old country songs, bits of news he thought the world would forget if he didn't trap them on tape. Walter had hated the sound of those buttons, the hard plastic clack of them. Frank used to stop conversations that way too. Clack. Finished. Walter closed the cassette door again. Then he noticed the cord wrapped around the back. He stared at it for a few seconds, annoyed by the small invitation of it. If the thing didn't work, he could throw it out clean. If it did, then it became a decision. He set it on top of an overturned milk crate, plugged it into the wall near the deep freezer, and waited. Nothing happened. Good, he said. Then a red light blinked awake. Walter stood with his hands on his hips. That's not helpful. He pressed play. At first there was only hiss. The sound filled the garage, softly, like air escaping from a tire. Then came a warbled bit of music, an old song stretched thin by age, a guitar, a man's voice, singing about a road and a woman and some sorrow Walter did not care to identify. He almost smiled. Frank had played songs like that on Saturday mornings when Walter was young, loud enough to make the windows tremble, louder if Walter's mother complained. Back then, Frank seemed made of noise. Work boots on linoleum, belt buckle against the kitchen chair, a cough from the porch, a match struck against the stove. Then the song cut off. The silence after it was not clean. It trembled with static, a rough waiting sound. Walter reached toward the stop button. A voice came through. Well, the voice said, close to the recorder, rough with a smoker's breath. I don't know if this thing's even taking. Walter's hand stopped above the button. The garage did not become quiet. The light still buzzed. A truck passed somewhere beyond the closed door. The old freezer clicked and hummed in the corner. But Walter went still inside all of it. The voice continued, lower now, as if the man speaking had leaned back from the machine. Mary says I ought to say it out loud, says maybe a man can hear himself better that way. Walter's mouth went dry. He knew that voice. Not the idea of it, not the memory of it, the voice itself. Frank Bennett had been dead 22 years. Dead long enough that Walter no longer expected him in dreams. Dead long enough that his face had settled into photographs and his sayings had become things Walter repeated without admitting where they came from. Dead long enough that Walter had believed the sound of him was gone. But there he was. Not in memory. In the garage. In the little gray box with his name cut into the side. Walter lowered his hand slowly. The marker cap fell from between his teeth and bounced once on the concrete. The sound startled him. He bent to pick it up, but his knees did not bend right away. He stayed half leaning, one hand braced against the milk crate, listening. Frank cleared his throat on the tape. "Walter's been smoking," he said. Walter shut his eyes. For one brief, foolish second, he was not 71. He was 16 again, standing behind the tool shed with two other boys from the neighborhood, trying not to cough because coughing proved you were a child. He could taste the hot paper on his tongue, feel the cigarette pass to him like a dare. Here, before he saw him, the back door slam. His father's hand on his collar. The shame had a smell. Cut grass, tobacco, summer heat on metal siding. Walter opened his eyes, angry at how quickly the past had found the door. "Damn it," he whispered, but there was no force in it. On the tape, Frank said something too low to catch. The audio dipped, swallowed by hiss. Walter leaned closer without meaning to. A phone rang. The sound tore through the garage, sharp and modern and offensive. Walter jerked back. His cell phone vibrated on the lid of a box marked Kitchen, My SC, though there was nothing from the kitchen in it, except a mug from the county fair and 3 refrigerator magnets Daniel's mother had kept for no reason. Daniel's name glowed on the screen. Walter stared at it while Frank's voice continued underneath, buried in static. He pressed pause before answering. "Yeah? You still at the house?" Daniel asked. Walter looked around the garage at the boxes, the open contractor bag, the cassette player waiting with its red light on. "No, Dan, I'm at the beach." Daniel exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite patience. "I'm asking because I can come by after work if you need help with the last load." "I told you I've got it." "You also told me the basement was done, and then I found 6 boxes of Christmas lights and a broken dehumidifier. That dehumidifier might still work." "Dad." Walter rubbed his forehead. Daniel sounded tired. Not just end of the day tired. There was a thickness to his voice, a delay before certain words. Walter knew that delay. He had listened for it more often lately, though he pretended he didn't. "What time is it?" Walter asked. "Little after 5. Long day? Normal day?" That doesn't answer the question. It answers enough. Walter glanced at the cassette player. The red light held steady. Daniel said, "Claire made room in the hall closet. We can put your coats there. And the bed frame came. I'll set it up tonight." "You don't have to do all that tonight. If I don't, you'll sleep in a chair to prove a point." Walter almost said, "I have slept in worse places than a chair." Instead, he said, "Oh, I'm not helpless." "I didn't say you were. You say it without saying it." There was a pause. In that pause, Walter heard something in the background on Daniel's end. A cabinet closing. Glass against countertop. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Daniel said carefully, "I'm trying to make this easier." Walter looked at the tape player again, at his father's carved initials. Frank had tried to make things easier too, in his own way. Easier by ruling the house before the house could fall apart. Easier by turning fear into orders. Easier by making sure a boy never forgot the cost of doing wrong. Walter's grip tightened around the phone. "You been drinking?" he asked. The silence changed. "Jesus, Dad." I asked a question. And there it is. There what is? That tone. Walter straightened. "What tone?" "The one where you already decided what I am before I say anything." Walter felt heat rise in his face, not because Daniel was wrong, because he had said it too cleanly. "I'm your father," Walter said. "I know. I'm allowed to worry. I know that too." But Daniel's voice had gone flat now, the way it did when he was closing a door without moving his hand. Walter heard his son breathing, heard the small exhaustion inside it. And for an instant, he wanted to say something gentler. Something like, "I don't know how to do this without sounding like him." The words came close. They stopped behind his teeth. Daniel said, "I'll come by at 7. "I don't need the—" "I'll come by at 7, Daniel repeated. "Please don't move the big boxes by yourself." The call ended before Walter could answer. He stood there, with the phone still pressed to his ear. In the old days, hanging up had weight. A receiver slammed into its cradle could shake a whole kitchen. Now a person could disappear with one quiet tap, leaving you holding a piece of glass and all the things you had failed to say. Walter lowered the phone. The garage looked different now. Not because anything had moved, because the tape was there. Because Daniel's voice was still in his ear. Because Frank's voice waited inside the machine older than Daniel's marriage. Walter told himself to throw it away. He even picked it up. The plastic was warm from running. Dust clung to his thumb. He could take the cassette out, drop the whole thing into the trash, and let whatever Frank had meant to say rot under coffee grounds and packing tape. He had spent most of his adult life not needing more from his father. That had been the arrangement. Frank had been hard. Walter had survived him. They had made their peace in the thin way men sometimes did, by fixing gutters together after Walter married, by talking about weather, by letting grandchildren soften a room nobody apologized in. Then Frank died, and Walter had carried what he could carry and left the rest where it lay. But the voice, that was the trouble. The voice was not hard in the way Walter remembered. It was rough, yes. Defensive, embarrassed. But there had been something else under it when Frank said, "Mary says I ought to say it out loud." Uncertainty. Walter had never known what to do with an uncertain father. He set the cassette player back on the milk crate. He pressed rewind. The tape squealed softly as it turned backward. Walter watched the reels spin, one side filling, the other emptying, as if time were a thing that could be moved by a button if a man's thumb was stubborn enough. He stopped it, pressed play again. The music warbled. The hiss returned. Frank's voice emerged. "Well," Frank said, "I don't know if this thing's even taking." Walter stood closer this time. "Mary says I ought to say it out loud. Says maybe a man can hear himself better that way." Static. "Walter's been smoking." Walter swallowed. More static, then Frank, clear, tired. "I keep seeing my old man in that hospital bed. Chest rattling like a busted engine. 49 years old and looking 90. I told myself no boy of mine was going to go that way. I told myself fear was the same as love if it kept him alive." Walter's hand found the edge of the crate. The garage seemed to tilt. Not much, just enough that he had to brace himself. His father had never said love like that. Not where Walter could hear it. Not attached to him. On the tape, Frank breathed out. The sound cracked. But that day behind the shed, Walter stopped breathing. Frank's voice dropped until it was almost lost. "I shouldn't have used the broom." Walter's fingers dug into the plastic edge of the milk crate. The fluorescent light flickered once overhead. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, ordinary and far away. Inside the garage, Walter Bennett stood among the boxes he had packed to leave his life behind and understood, with a force that made him feel suddenly unsteady, that the one thing he had not meant to take with him had already come along. Chapter 2, The Summer of the Broom. Walter Bennett had the cigarette hidden in his fist so tightly that the paper went soft with sweat. He was 16 that summer, long-legged and restless, with hair that would not stay combed and a face still too young for the things he wanted people to believe about him. He stood behind the tool shed where the grass grew high along the fence line, his back turned toward the house, trying to look like a boy who had done this 100 times before. He had not. The cigarette had come from Tommy Raines, who stole them from his mother's purse and handed them out like proof of manhood. Tommy could hold smoke in his lungs without coughing. Eddie Miller could blow it through his nose. Walter could barely get the thing lit without feeling ridiculous, but he had taken it anyway. All summer, the house had felt too small around him. His father's rules seemed to hang in every doorway. Don't leave tools wet. Don't slam the screen door. Don't talk back to your mother. Don't waste food. Don't come home smelling like beer, like trouble, like other people's bad habits. And above all else, don't touch cigarettes. That rule was not spoken like the others. It did not come with a warning or a lecture. It came with Frank Bennett's face going hard in a way that made the room shrink. No cigarettes in the house. No cigarettes in the car. No cigarettes near the porch. No cigarettes, period. Walter knew the rule. Everyone knew the rule. His mother knew not to leave an ashtray out for visitors. His Uncle Ray knew to smoke by the curb if he came over after work. Even the neighbors seemed to understand that Frank Bennett could tolerate late grass, loud dogs, and bad parking, but not the smell of tobacco drifting over his property. Walter had never understood why the rule had to be so heavy. Adults smoked everywhere. At bowling alleys, at diners, outside the machine shop where Frank worked. At weddings and funerals and little league games, men held cigarettes between two fingers as if they were extensions of their hands. Walter had seen pastors smoke behind church halls and teachers smoke in cars with the windows cracked. But in Frank's house, a cigarette might as well have been a loaded gun. So Walter wanted to know what all the fear was about. That was what he told himself anyway. He struck the match against the side of the shed. It flared too fast, bright against his fingers, and he almost dropped it. The sulfur smell bit his nose. He touched the flame to the cigarette and drew in like he had seen Tommy do. Heat filled his mouth. Then his throat closed. He bent forward, coughing hard, one hand on his knee, the cigarette held away from his body like a dangerous tool. His eyes watered. He cursed under his breath, embarrassed though no one was there to see it. From inside the house came the muted clink of dishes. His mother was cleaning up lunch. His father was supposed to be in the driveway changing the oil in the old Ford before his evening shift. Walter straightened and wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. "You're supposed to breathe it in," he muttered, as if the cigarette had failed him. He tried again. This time he took less, just enough to feel the smoke sit bitter on his tongue. He held it there, then let it out in a thin gray line. For 1 second he felt older. Not good exactly, not free exactly, but separate, like he had stepped across some small private border and nobody in the house knew. Then the back door opened. Walter froze. The cigarette burned between his fingers. He heard the screen door slap shut, heard work boots on the back steps, heard the metal scrape of a wrench being set down on the porch rail. Frank did not call his name. That made it worse. Walter turned slowly. His father stood at the edge of the yard in his white undershirt and work pants, his hands blackened with oil, a rag hanging from one fist. He was not a large man, but he had the stillness of one, broad through the shoulders, forearms hard from years of lifting, pulling, tightening, carrying. His hair, dark then except for gray at the temples, was damp with heat. His eyes were on Walter's hand. The cigarette suddenly felt enormous. Walter dropped it. The orange tip hit the dirt near his shoe and smoked there, small and guilty. For a moment, neither of them moved. The yard held its ordinary sounds around them. A lawnmower 2 houses over, a dog chain rattling, cicadas buzzing from the maple tree. Somewhere inside, Mary Bennett shut a cabinet door. Frank's face did not change all at once. That was the thing Walter would remember later. It was not instant rage. It was something arriving first, something that struck his father before anger covered it. Frank's mouth opened slightly, like the sight had taken air from him. His eyes went not to Walter's face, but to the smoke curling from the ground. For one strange second, Walter thought his father looked afraid. Then Frank came across the yard. Walter stepped back. "Dad!" Frank grabbed him by the front of his t-shirt and shoved him against the shed wall hard enough to knock the breath from him. "What is that?" Walter's shoulder hit the wood. "Nothing." "What is that?" "It's just the..." Frank slapped the shed beside Walter's head with his open palm. Not Walter's face, the shed. The sound cracked through the yard. Walter flinched. "Don't you lie to me. I wasn't... You think I'm blind?" Walter's fear sharpened into embarrassment. The kind that made him stupid. "It's one cigarette," he snapped. "It's not like I killed anybody." Frank went still. The words seemed to remain in the hot air between them, bigger than Walter had meant them to be. His father's hand loosened on his shirt. Walter saw it then. The way Frank's eyes shifted, no longer in the yard, no longer on his son. Somewhere else. Somewhere with a hospital smell, maybe. Though Walter did not know that yet. Somewhere where a man younger than Frank was, now had lain with his chest rattling and his skin gone gray, while people whispered in hallways and pretended not to hear the coughing. Walter did not know the details. He only knew that his grandfather had died before Walter was old enough to remember him well. He knew there were no cigarettes in the house after that. He knew his father went silent whenever anyone said lung cancer. But at 16, knowing was not the same as understanding. Frank bent, picked up the cigarette from the dirt, and held it in front of Walter's face. The paper had bent where Walter had squeezed it. A small line of smoke leaked from the tip. "You want this?" Frank asked. Walter's throat hurt. "No." "You wanted it a minute ago." "I said no." "You want to cough your lungs out in some bed? You want your mother sitting there, watching you turn into bones?" Walter stared at him. That was too much, too ugly, too sudden. It made Walter feel like a child and a criminal at the same time. "I just tried it," he said, but his voice came smaller now. Frank crushed the cigarette in his fist. A hiss rose from his skin. Mary's voice came from the kitchen window. "Frank?" Frank did not answer. Walter saw the pain flash across his father's face, quick and bright. His hand must have burned. But Frank only opened his fist and let the mashed cigarette fall. Then he turned toward the porch. For one relieved second, Walter thought it was over. Frank picked up the broom. It was the old corn broom his mother used for the back steps. Its straw darkened at the bottom from years of sweeping damp leaves and mud. Frank held it near the middle, not by the handle the way someone would if they meant to clean. Walter's stomach dropped. "Dad," he said. Frank came back down the steps. Mary appeared at the screen door. "Frank, don't." "Go inside." "Frank." "I said go inside." Walter looked past his father to his mother, but she had one hand on the door frame and the other at her mouth. She looked frightened in a way Walter had rarely seen. Not surprised. Frightened because she knew something had already gone too far. Frank stopped in front of Walter. "You listen to me," he said, but his voice had changed. It was not loud now. That made it worse. You don't put that poison in your body. You hear me? I hear you. No, you don't. I said I hear you. You think this is a game? I don't. You think you're a man now? Walter said nothing. That silence was taken as an answer. The first strike hit the side of his thigh. The pain was bright and shocking, more surprise than hurt at first. Walter jerked sideways and grabbed at the shed. Dad! The second hit landed across his hip. The broom made a dry, ugly sound against denim. Mary cried out from the porch. Frank was breathing hard now. You want to act grown? You want to ruin yourself like a grown man? Walter tried to move away, but Frank caught his arm. Not gently, not with thought. His fingers dug in above Walter's elbow, and the broom came down again, this time across his backside and lower back. Walter twisted. Stop! Then learn. I said stop. You don't get to throw your life away under my roof. Another strike. The straw ends scattered dust from the shed wall. Walter's anger broke apart into fear. Then the fear broke into something smaller and more humiliating. He heard himself make a sound he hated, half sob, half gasp, and he clenched his jaw to stop the next one from coming. But the next one came anyway. He was 16. He wanted to be a man. He wanted Tommy Raines and Eddie Miller to see him holding smoke like it meant nothing. He wanted his father to look at him and see someone too old to be grabbed. Instead, he was pinned beside the shed, crying, while his mother stood on the porch and his father swung a broom like fear had taken over his arms. The broom cracked on the last strike. Not loud like a gunshot, lower, wood giving way. The handle split near the straw binding and hung at an angle in Frank's hands. Everything stopped. Frank stared at the broken broom. Walter pressed himself against the shed, shaking. Sweat ran down his back. His leg throbbed. His throat burned from smoke and crying and the effort not to cry. Mary came down the steps then. No one stopped her. She crossed the yard and put herself between them, not touching Walter yet, not touching Frank either. Enough, she said. Frank looked at her as if he had returned from somewhere and did not know how he had gotten there. His hands opened. The broken broom fell to the grass. Walter looked at the pieces. The straw head, the split handle, the place where ordinary had become something else. His father took one step toward him. Walter flinched. That did it. Frank stopped as if he had hit a wall. For the first time that afternoon, his face changed in a way Walter could read. Not anger, not authority, something naked and stunned. Walter did not stay to understand it. He pushed away from the shed and ran. His mother called his name, but he kept going. Across the yard, through the side gate, past the driveway where the Ford sat with its hood up and its oil pan underneath. He ran until his lungs burned worse than the cigarette had made them burn, until the neighborhood blurred in the hot light, until he reached the drainage ditch behind the school and sat under the overpass with his knees pulled up and his face buried in his arms. He did not smoke again that day. That was what Frank had wanted. But Walter also did not come home until after dark. When he did, the broom was gone from the yard. The tools had been put away. His mother had left a plate covered with foil on the stove. His father sat at the kitchen table with his work shirt on, though he had missed his shift. Neither of them spoke. Walter walked past him toward the hall. Frank's chair scraped. Walter stopped. For a second, the house held its breath. Frank said, "You eat?" Walter did not turn around. "I'm not hungry." Another silence. Then Frank said, "Your mother saved you pork chops." Walter looked down at his shoes. Dirt streaked the sides. His leg hurt. He wanted his father to say something else. He did not know what. He would not have known what to do with it if it came. But Frank only stood there in the kitchen, trapped behind his own face. Walter went to his room and closed the door. Later, after the house had gone quiet, Frank Bennett sat alone at the kitchen table with the cassette recorder in front of him. Mary had gone to bed, or had pretended to. The porch light was still on. A moth tapped again and again against the window over the sink. Frank had washed his hands 3 times, but he could still smell smoke. Not from the cigarette, from memory. He pressed his thumb against the small burn in his palm where he had crushed the lid end. It hurt, and he welcomed that because it was simple. A burn knew what it was. A burn did not ask a man to explain himself. The recorder sat on the table beside an ashtray they kept for guests, but never used. Frank turned the machine toward him and stared at the buttons. He had fixed engines, patched roofs, carried men twice his size out of shop accidents, and held his own father's hand while the old man drowned slowly in a hospital bed without water anywhere near him. But he did not know how to walk down the hall and tell his son he had been afraid. He pressed record. The machine clicked. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat. "Well," Frank said, his voice low in the sleeping kitchen, "I don't know if this thing's even taking." He looked toward the hallway. No movement. Mary says I ought to say it out loud, says maybe a man can hear himself better that way. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Walter's been smoking. The words came out flat, too flat, like a report from work. Frank rubbed both hands over his face and tried again. I keep seeing my old man in that hospital bed, he said, chest rattling like a busted engine, 49 years old and looking 90. I told myself no boy of mine was going to go that way. I told myself fear was the same as love if it kept him alive. He stopped. The kitchen clock ticked. He saw Walter's face by the shed. Not defiant now, not smart-mouthed. The other face, the one after the broom broke, the one that had flinched when Frank reached for him. Frank swallowed hard. But that day behind the shed, his voice thinned. I shouldn't have used the broom. He reached for the stop button, missed it once, then pressed it hard enough to make the recorder slide against the table. The tape clicked off. Frank sat there with his hand still on the machine. Down the hall, his son did not come out. Frank did not go in. And so the words stayed where he had put them, wound tight inside the cassette, waiting for a house to empty and an old man to finally hear what had been too hard to say aloud. Chapter 3, The Bottle in Daniel's Kitchen. Daniel had bought new sheets. That was the first thing Walter noticed. And because it moved him more than he wanted, he pretended not to notice it at all. He stood in the doorway of the small back bedroom, while Daniel crossed the room ahead of him, talking too quickly about practical things. The bed frame had been assembled against the far wall. A nightstand sat beside it with a lamp, a digital clock, and a small dish for keys or loose change. The curtains were plain blue, not new but washed. On the dresser, Daniel had left a stack of folded towels and a mug with a packet of instant coffee tucked inside it, as if Walter might wake in the night and need proof that someone had thought of mourning. It's not much, Daniel said, but the mattress is good, firm like you said. Claire found the sheets on sale, but they're cotton, not that slippery stuff. Walter stepped into the room slowly. The floor creaked near the closet. Daniel pointed. I cleared the left side for your jackets. There's room under the bed too, if you want to keep some boxes there. Not too many. I mean, I know you're bringing half the garage, apparently. Walter looked at the closet door, at the bed, at the lamp. There was an extra extension cord coiled neatly behind the nightstand. Daniel had remembered that Walter liked to keep his radio close. You didn't have to do all this, Walter said. Daniel shrugged. You need a room. I could have helped put the frame together. You were packing. I can still turn a wrench. I know. The answer came too fast, gentle but fast. A son stepping around a father's pride as carefully as he might step around a sleeping dog. Walter hated that he heard it. He walked to the dresser and touched the folded towel on top. It was softer than the towels at his house, which had all gone thin from years of use and his refusal to replace anything that still technically worked. Daniel watched him. You'll be able to see the maple from this window in the fall, Daniel said. The one out back. It turns red before the others. Walter looked out. The yard was smaller than his own, fenced on two sides, with a patch of grass Daniel had been meaning to reseed for 3 summers. A grill stood under a cover near the patio. A plastic bucket sat upside down by the hose. It was a good house. Not fancy, not new, but cared for in the places Daniel had time to care. Walter felt the cassette in his jacket pocket. He had not meant to bring it. He had meant to leave it on the kitchen table at his own house, beside the boxes and the marker and all the things waiting to be decided. But when he had put on his jacket, his hand had reached for it as if it were medicine or evidence. Now it sat against his ribs, small and hard. Daniel said, You hungry? Claire left lasagna. She had book club tonight, but she said to make sure you eat something besides gas station peanuts. I don't live on gas station peanuts. You bought 2 bags yesterday. They were on sale. They were 2 for $6. That's not a sale. That's a trap. Walter almost smiled. For a moment, the room allowed it. Then they went to the kitchen. Daniel's kitchen was warmer than the bedroom, bright under recessed lights, smelling faintly of tomato sauce and dish soap. A covered pan of lasagna sat on the stove. 2 plates had already been set out on the counter, along with forks, napkins, and a small bowl of grated Parmesan. Daniel moved around the room with the restless competence of a man trying to make care look casual. You want water? Tea? Coffee's probably a bad idea this late.
Water's fine.
Still no ice? Still no ice. I know. Ice is for people who don't trust water. I never said that. You said it with your face. Walter took off his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. The cassette bumped the wood. Daniel glanced at the pocket. What's that? Nothing. Daniel paused. Walter reached into the pocket, then stopped himself. Something I found. Old tape. A music tape? Maybe. That was not a lie, not completely. Daniel nodded and turned toward the refrigerator. Walter watched him pull out a pitcher of water, watched him set a glass under the spout, watched the easy movements of a grown man in his own home. Then Walter saw the bottle. It stood near the sink, half hidden behind a cutting board, its amber glass catching the kitchen light. Not a fancy bottle. Not empty, but not full. Beside it, in the blue recycling bin tucked under the counter, 2 beer cans lay crushed among a milk jug and a pasta sauce jar. Walter's hand tightened on the chair back. The room did not change. The lasagna still steamed under its foil. The refrigerator hummed. Daniel's keys sat in a little ceramic bowl by the door. Somewhere upstairs, the heating vent clicked. But Walter felt the old shed wall at his back. Not clearly, not as a memory he chose, just the body of it. The smell of cut grass and cigarette paper, the shock of being caught with something small that became enormous in a father's eyes. His gaze returned to the bottle. A bottle in a kitchen, that was all. A man could have a drink in his own house. A man could have 2 beers after work. Walter knew that. He was not a fool. He had had drinks in his life. He had poured whiskey over ice after funerals, beer into plastic cups at backyard cookouts, a little bourbon into coffee once during a snowstorm when the furnace died, and the whole house felt mean. But he had heard Daniel's voice on the phone. The thickness, the delay. And last week, when Daniel came by to help move boxes, he had leaned too heavily against the truck bed while laughing at nothing much. The week before that, Claire had said, "He's just tired," too quickly when Walter asked if Daniel was sleeping. Small things. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Daniel set the glass of water in front of him. "Dad?" Walter looked up. "What? You kind of disappeared there." "No, I didn't." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the sink, then back. Walter hated that too. The way Daniel knew exactly where he had been looking. "It's just dinner," Daniel said. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." Walter picked up the glass and took a drink. The water was room temperature, the way he liked it. And that kindness made him feel worse. He set the glass down carefully. "I'm not trying to start something." Daniel leaned back against the counter. That's usually what people say right before they start something. Walter looked at the lasagna because the lasagna did not look back. "How often?" he asked. Daniel's jaw moved once. "How often what?" Walter could hear it already, the shape of the conversation turning bad. He tried to soften his voice. "How often are you drinking?" Daniel laughed once, without humor. "Wow." "I'm asking?" "Yeah, I heard you." "Then answer me." There it was. The tone. Walter heard it after it left his mouth. Not loud, not cruel. Worse, maybe. Certain. As if the answer already belonged to him and Daniel was only delaying delivery. Daniel folded his arms. "I had a beer after work." "And the bottle?" "Claire used some of that for a sauce." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't make it sound like I can't see what's in front of me." Daniel stared at him. For a second, Walter saw not the man in the kitchen, but the boy Daniel had been at 13. Caught sneaking back into the house, past curfew, cheeks red from cold, eyes bright with a defiance that always looked more scared than brave. Walter had handled that badly, too. Too many questions, too sharp. Too much of himself standing between Daniel and the door. Daniel said, "You've been in my house 10 minutes. I'm about to live in your house. That doesn't make it yours." The words landed cleanly. Walter felt them and tried not to show it. Daniel pushed off the counter and moved to the stove. He lifted the foil from the lasagna, then put it back down too fast. Steam rose and vanished. "I'm not a kid hiding something behind the garage," Daniel said. Walter went still. Daniel did not know. He could not know why that sentence reached across 40 years and put its hand around Walter's throat. Walter looked at the sink, at the bottle, at his own hands. "I didn't say you were a kid." "No, you just ask questions like I'm one." "I'm worried." "You're always worried?" "That's not a crime." "No, but you make it feel like one." Walter pushed his thumb against the side of the water glass until the rim pressed into his skin. In his pocket, the cassette waited. Frank's voice waited. "I told myself, fear was the same as love if it kept him alive." Walter had heard that sentence 3 times before coming over. 3 times, and still he had walked into Daniel's kitchen and let fear put on his coat. He took a breath. "I heard you on the phone yesterday," he said. "You sounded, tired." "Not just tired." Daniel's face closed. "Careful," he said. The word was quiet. Walter should have stopped there. He knew it even as his mouth kept moving. "I've seen this get away from people." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "People?" "I'm saying it can sneak up." "What can?" "You know what?" "No, say it." Walter looked away. Daniel nodded once, hurt showing now beneath the anger. "Right. You don't want to say it because then you'd have to admit what you came in here thinking. I came here because you asked me to look at the room. You came here with a verdict in your pocket." Walter's hand moved without meaning to toward the cassette. Daniel saw it. What is that tape? Nothing to do with this. Then why do you keep touching it? Walter pulled his hand back. The kitchen felt smaller. Not because Daniel had raised his voice. He hadn't. That was the worst of it. The damage was happening at regular volume. Daniel leaned both hands on the counter. I have a drink sometimes, he said. Sometimes I have two. I work 10 hours. I come home. I help Claire. I try to get this place ready so you don't feel like you're being stored in a closet. I am not falling apart because there's a bottle by the sink. I didn't say you were falling apart. You're looking at me like I am. Walter opened his mouth, but nothing useful came. Daniel gave a short laugh and looked toward the ceiling. I knew this would happen. What would happen? You'd move in and start counting things. Bottles, bills, how late I get home, whether I fix the gutter right, whether I'm using the wrong detergent, whether I'm handling my own life in a way you approve of. That's not fair. No, maybe not. Daniel looked back at him. But neither is standing in my kitchen and making me feel like I have to prove I'm allowed to be an adult. Walter's throat tightened. For a moment, anger rose in him as protection. He wanted to say Daniel was being dramatic. He wanted to say a father had the right to ask. He wanted to point at the bottle, at the cans, at the tiredness in Daniel's voice, and make the evidence speak loudly enough that he would not have to sound afraid. Instead, what came out was, I'm trying to keep you safe. Daniel's expression changed. Not softened. Changed. That's not your job anymore. The sentence left no room. Walter looked at his son, at the lines around his mouth, the gray beginning in his hair, the work shirt wrinkled at the cuffs. Daniel was not 16. He was not standing behind a shed. He was a grown man in a kitchen he paid for, in a house where he had made room for his father. Walter knew this. Knowing did not tell him where to put the fear. Daniel's voice dropped. If you're coming here to live with us, I need to know you can be here. I am here? I mean here, not waiting for me to mess up, not turning every tired day into evidence. Walter looked down. The blue recycling bin sat open under the counter. 2 cans. Maybe from last night. Maybe from the weekend. Maybe shared. Maybe not. He had built a whole danger out of aluminum and glass because danger was easier to hold than uncertainty. Daniel said, maybe we need to think about this. Walter looked up. The words were not shouted. That made them worse. Think about what? Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. When he dropped them, he looked tired in a way Walter could not argue with. You moving in? Walter felt the chair behind him, though he was not sitting in it. I sold the bed, he said. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I'm not saying no, I'm saying maybe we need to slow down. Slow down? At 71, with half his house already in boxes and the other half waiting to be judged, Walter had no idea how to slow down without stopping completely. The lasagna sat between them, untouched. Daniel turned away first. He opened a drawer, took out a spatula, then shut the drawer without using it. You should eat before you go, he said. I'm not hungry. Dad, I'm not hungry. Walter reached for his jacket. The cassette knocked against the chair again, a small plastic sound. Daniel heard it. Of course he heard it. Neither of them mentioned it. At the door, Daniel followed but did not come too close. You don't have to leave like this, he said. Walter put on his jacket. His fingers were clumsy with the zipper. I've still got things to pack. It's dark. I know how dark works. Daniel's face tightened. Walter regretted it immediately. But regret, he was learning, did not fix the shape of a sentence once it had already entered the room. He opened the door. Cold air moved in around his ankles. The porch light came on automatically, bright and practical, exposing the two of them in the doorway. The son who had prepared a room, the father who had found danger beside the sink. Daniel said, quieter now. I'm not him, Dad. Walter stopped. His hand remained on the doorknob. For one terrible second, he thought Daniel meant Frank. Then Daniel added, whoever you're afraid I'm turning into. Walter turned back slightly. Daniel looked embarrassed by what he had said, as if the truth had escaped before he could dress it properly. Walter wanted to answer. He wanted to say, I don't even know who I'm afraid of anymore. But the words were too large for the doorway, too late for the kitchen, too new for a man who had spent most of his life turning fear into instructions. So he nodded once. That was all. Outside, he walked to his truck with the cassette heavy in his pocket. He did not start the engine right away. Through the front window, he could see Daniel standing at the kitchen counter, one hand on the back of his neck, the foil still covering the untouched lasagna. Walter looked down at his lap. His hands were shaking. Not much. Enough. At home, the house felt colder than it had that morning. Boxes lined the hallway. A lamp burned in the living room because he had forgotten to turn it off before leaving. The garage door was still open a foot at the bottom, letting in a strip of night. Walter went to the kitchen and took the cassette from his pocket. He set it on the table. For a long while, he only stood there. Then he pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed the old cassette player in front of him. He did not know yet how to talk to Daniel. Understanding Frank had not saved him from sounding like Frank. That was the part he could not get around. Walter pressed play. The tape hissed, caught, and Frank Bennett's dead voice returned to the room. Chapter 4, What Frank Could Not Say. Walter did not want the tape to make his father harder to hate. That was the trouble with it. The cassette sat on the kitchen table under the yellow light, plain as any old thing pulled from a garage. A rectangle of plastic. 2 little reels. A strip of brown tape wound tight around what should have stayed dead with the man who made it. Walter stood over it for a long while. The house around him had settled into its night sounds. Pipes ticking, furnace breathing, cardboard boxes creaking slightly in the hallway as if the whole place were adjusting to being half emptied. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires whispering over damp pavement, then disappeared. He had come home from Daniel's with the taste of failure still in his mouth. Not a dramatic failure, no shouting, no slammed doors, no broken glass, just a bottle near a sink, a father's question, a son's face closing. Sometimes damage did not need volume. Sometimes it worked better without it. Walter pulled out the chair and sat. The cassette player waited in front of him. He put one finger on the play button and did not press it. Because if Frank was only cruel, Walter knew what to do with him. He had known for decades. A cruel father could be survived, judged, buried, turned into a story with a clean edge. He hurt me, I endured it. I became something else. But the first half of the tape had already taken that edge and dulled it. I told myself fear was the same as love if it kept him alive. Walter hated the sentence. He hated it because it sounded like an excuse. He hated it because it did not sound like an excuse. He pressed play. The machine clicked, hissed, then caught Frank's voice in the middle of a breath. I don't know how to say a thing once it's already come out wrong, Frank said. Walter sat back. The voice was thinner here, less steady than before. There was a scrape on the tape, maybe the recorder shifting across the kitchen table, maybe Frank's hand knocking it by accident. I keep thinking of my old man, Frank said. Not the way he was before. I try to, but that ain't what comes first. A pause. The first thing that comes is the hospital. Walter looked at the table. His grandfather had always been a photograph to him. A man in a work shirt standing beside a pickup truck, one hand on the hood, smiling like someone had said something just before the picture was taken. Walter remembered being told he had his grandfather's eyes. He remembered being told he was lucky not to remember the end. Frank remembered the end. On the tape, Frank breathed in through his nose. He was 49, he said. 49, and I could hear him before I got to the room. That rattle, like something loose in an engine you couldn't reach. Nurses kept saying they'd make him comfortable. The word came out with a hard little laugh that was not laughter at all. Walter's own breathing changed before he knew why. He saw Frank's hands, not the hands with the broom, not at first. The hands that could take apart a carburetor and lay every piece on a rag in perfect order. The hands that tested bathwater with the back of 2 fingers when Walter was small and feverish, pretending Mary had asked him to do it. The hands that never held still when something in the house was broken, because fixing a hinge or tightening a pipe was easier than sitting beside a feeling. Walter closed his eyes. He did not want those hands in the room. Frank continued. My mother asked him to quit for years. He'd say he was cutting back, say one after supper didn't count, say everybody had to die of something. The tape clicked faintly. Then he did. Walter opened his eyes. The kitchen light hummed above him. He had heard fragments of this before, growing up. Never in a full shape. His father had said things like, your granddad smoked himself into the ground, and that stuff will kill you, and only a fool pays money to choke. Walter had heard rules, not grief. Warnings, not a son standing outside a hospital room afraid to go in. Frank's voice lowered. When I saw Walter with that cigarette, I didn't see a boy acting stupid. I should have. Maybe then I'd have handled it like a man with sense. Walter's hand went still on the table. I saw my father's mouth open, trying to breathe. The room seemed to lose heat. Walter did not move. Not because he forgave him. Not because the words repaired anything. But because something in him, something old and stubborn, had been prepared for Frank to defend himself. To say boys need discipline. To say the world was hard. To say Walter had earned it. Instead, Frank sounded ashamed. Walter looked toward the dark kitchen window. His reflection sat there, older than Frank had ever become on the tape. His face drawn and pale in the glass. Frank said, I grabbed him. I saw that smoke by his hand and I grabbed him. Mary was saying my name. I remember that. I remember hearing her and not hearing her. The tape hissed. I scared him. Walter's throat tightened. A ridiculous response, he told himself. A useless one. The boy who needed to hear that was 16 and gone. The man who said it was 22 years dead. No one in this kitchen could be rescued by a sentence coming late. Still, Walter's fingers pressed hard into the edge of the table. Frank's voice cracked on the next words. I hit him because I was scared. That's the truth of it. I can dress it up if I want. Call it discipline, call it stopping him. But I was scared, and I put that fear on him. Walter stood abruptly. The chair scraped back. He walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, then turned it off again without touching the water. His chest felt crowded. He did not want to stand there and be moved by Frank Bennett. It felt disloyal to the boy against the shed. It felt like opening the door for the wrong person. He leaned both hands on the counter. The old memory came anyway, but not the one he expected. Not the broom. A winter morning, 2 months after the beating. Walter had been late for school because the car would not start, and he had come outside angry, ready to walk, ready to refuse any help that smelled like fatherhood. Frank had already been in the driveway with the hood up, breath white in the cold, jumper cables in his hand. He had not said good morning. He had not said, I know you need to get to school. He had only said, turn the key when I tell you. The engine had coughed alive. On the passenger seat later, Walter found a paper bag with a ham sandwich and an apple inside. His mother had been sick that morning. Frank must have packed it. No note, no apology, just lunch. Walter gripped the counter until his palms hurt. Another memory came behind it. A loose stair tread fixed while Walter was at work. A tire replaced before Walter knew it was bald. A porch light installed outside Walter's first apartment after Mary said the steps were too dark. Frank had never said, I'm sorry I hurt you. He had said, you need better locks. He had said, your left brake light's out. He had said, I sharpened that mower blade. Walter bowed his head. The tape kept playing behind him. Frank's voice small across the kitchen. I don't know how to go in that room now, Frank said. He looked at me like a silence. Walter turned from the sink. The recorder's little red light glowed steadily. Frank tried again. He looked at me like I was the thing he needed protecting from. Walter slowly returned to the chair. The sentence had weight, not because it freed Frank from blame. It did the opposite. It put the blame exactly where it belonged, in Frank's own mouth. And that made it harder to keep him simple. Walter sat. On the tape, Frank cleared his throat. My father loved me, I know he did. Never said it much. Men like him didn't. Men like me don't, I guess. He kept the furnace running and the roof patched and food on the table. Thought that was the language. Maybe it was, Frank paused. But it ain't enough when a boy is scared of you. Walter's eyes burned. He looked down quickly, annoyed by it, by the body's betrayal, by the way it could still respond to a father 22 years gone. He wiped under one eye with the heel of his hand and frowned at the wetness as if it had done something improper. The tape rolled on. I wanted Walter to live, Frank said. This time the words came stripped of explanation. I wanted him alive and whole and old enough to hate me if he had to. I thought if he hated me and stayed alive, I could take that bargain. Walter stared at the cassette player. There it was. Love malformed. Love with dirt under its nails and fear in its teeth. Love that would rather be hated than helpless. Love that had chosen the wrong bargain and made a child pay the price. Walter's anger did not vanish. That surprised him less than the tenderness. The anger stayed. It belonged there. It stood beside the shed, 16 years old, humiliated and hurting. It had earned its place. But something else entered the kitchen too. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever in the clean way people like to talk about. Understanding, perhaps. No, even that felt too tidy. It was more like the room had gained another door, and Walter could see, through it, that Frank had been standing in pain long before he handed any pain to his son. That did not excuse the broom. It made the broom worse in a different way. Because Frank had known terror and passed terror on. Because Walter had heard Daniel say, "You make it feel like a crime." Walter pushed his fingers against his mouth. The bottle in Daniel's kitchen came back to him. The 2 cans in the recycling. Daniel's folded arms. His voice when he said, "That's not your job anymore." Walter had walked into his son's house carrying fear like a family tool, old and familiar, and he had almost called it love. The tape hissed. Frank said, "If I was any kind of father, I'd go tell him this, not to this machine, to him." Walter looked at the player. But I get to his door and all I can think is, he'll look at me again, and I'll see what I did. So I stand there like a damn coward and walk away. Frank's voice thinned almost to nothing. Maybe tomorrow. The words landed softly. Walter knew before the tape confirmed it that tomorrow had not come. Not the right one. There had been practical conversations after that. School, work, dinner, oil changes. Years of them. Enough to build a life around the hole without ever naming the hole. Frank had waited for a braver day. Then he had aged. Then he had died. The recorder clicked, the sound shifting. For a few seconds, there was only kitchen noise from 40 years earlier. A chair creak, maybe Frank moving, the faint tick of an old clock. Then Frank's voice returned, farther away. "Walter," he said. Walter stopped breathing. It was not a statement about him now. Not the boy, not my son, his name. Frank said it again, quieter. "Walter." The sound of his own name in his father's mouth crossed the years with such terrible tenderness that Walter's hand rose halfway toward the machine, as if to stop it, or touch it, or hold it down. "I love you," Frank said. The words were awkward, almost rough, as if they had injured him on the way out. I don't know how to say that, so it sounds right. Maybe it don't, coming after what I did. But it's true. It was true before. It was true when I lost my temper. It'll be true even if you never believe me. Walter made a small sound and covered his mouth. The kitchen blurred. He did not feel comforted. That was the strange part. He felt pierced. All his life, he had wanted something from Frank, and all his life he had made peace with not getting it. Now here it was, late and useless and real, and it did not know where to go. It could not walk down the hall to the 16-year-old boy. It could not undo the broom. It could not sit beside Walter's mother at the kitchen table and teach the family a new language. It could only arrive now in a house being emptied, when Walter had already carried Frank inside him long enough to become dangerous to Daniel. On the tape, Frank exhaled. "I hope someday I learn how to tell him without scaring him first." Then the recording ended. Not dramatically. Just a click. A final hiss. Silence. Walter sat with his hand over his mouth long after the tape stopped moving. The furnace came on. Somewhere in the house, a box settled with a soft cardboard sigh. He lowered his hand and looked at the cassette player. Frank Bennett was still dead. The broom had still broken. The boy by the shed had still flinched. And Frank had loved him. All of it had to live in the same room now. Walter leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, not because there was anything to see there, but because if he looked at the phone on the table, he would have to decide what kind of father he was going to be before morning. The phone sat beside the cassette. Daniel's name was only a few taps away. Walter reached for it. His thumb found the screen, woke it, and hovered over his son's contact. He could say, "I'm sorry." He could say, "I heard something tonight." He could say, "I was afraid and I made that your problem." But every sentence in his head sounded too late, too heavy, too much like a man trying to explain himself after the damage instead of changing before more damage came. The screen dimmed. Walter let it go dark. He sat there in the old kitchen, one hand on the phone, the other beside the silent cassette player, wanting to call his son, and not yet knowing how to speak without bringing Frank's voice with him. Chapter 5. The Almost. Walter brought the box over before dinner because arriving with something in his hands felt safer than arriving with an apology. It was a small box, not heavy, marked books. Maybe in black marker, though only 3 books were inside. The rest was made up of things he had not known how to categorize. A tin of old keys, a framed photograph of Daniel at 10 holding a Little League trophy, 2 screwdrivers because Daniel's always seemed to disappear, and the cassette wrapped in a dish towel at the bottom. He had told himself he was bringing practical things. That was not entirely true. Daniel opened the front door in socks, his work shirt untucked, a dish towel over one shoulder. For half a second, he looked surprised to see Walter, though they had agreed on the time that morning. Then he stepped back. Hey. The greeting sat between them, ordinary and cautious. Walter lifted the box. Brought a few things. Daniel looked at it. That all? For now. Good. I was afraid you were going to show up with the drill press. You joke, but that thing still runs. I know it does. You tell me every Thanksgiving. Walter almost smiled. Daniel took the box from him before Walter could object. Not snatching, not treating him as weak, just taking the weight because he was younger and standing closer. Walter let him. That felt like progress. Inside, the house smelled of garlic, laundry detergent, and the faint warm dust of the furnace. The living room had been tidied since Walter's last visit. The stack of mail on the side table was gone. The throw blanket on the sofa had been folded. In the hallway, his bedroom door stood open, showing the bed made with the new blue sheets. The lamp already turned on, though it was still light outside. Daniel had put a small radio on the nightstand. Walter stopped when he saw it. Daniel noticed. I found it in the basement. It gets AM stations if you move the antenna around like you're trying to contact aliens. Walter stepped into the doorway. The radio was old but clean, wiped down, cord coiled neatly behind it. Beside it sat a yellow legal pad and a pen. On the dresser, Daniel had cleared a space wide enough for Walter's framed photograph of Mary, which still sat in a box at the old house, because Walter had not been ready to watch it belong somewhere else. "You didn't have to do that," Walter said. Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "You keep saying that. Because people keep doing things they don't have to do. Maybe that's how families work." The line was simple. It should have been easy to receive. Walter nodded because anything more might show too much. For a few minutes, they moved around the room like men carrying glass. Daniel asked where the box should go. Walter said the closet was fine. Daniel said he had bought shelf liners because the old wood snagged fabric. Walter said the wood was probably better quality than anything sold now. Daniel said, "There he is," and the corner of his mouth lifted. The air eased. Not fully, not enough to trust, but enough that Walter felt the dangerous little hope of a man who had made one bad turn and found the road still open. In the kitchen, Daniel had a pot of sauce on the stove and a cutting board crowded with onions, peppers, and a heel of bread. He moved carefully, but not stiffly. Walter noticed that. Daniel was trying too, keeping his voice even, making jokes small enough to survive. "You want coffee?" Daniel asked. "At this hour? It's 5:30. Coffee after 3 is how you end up staring at the ceiling all night. You stare at the ceiling anyway." Walter sat at the kitchen table. "That's different. That's professional." Daniel gave a real laugh then, quick and tired. The sound warmed Walter before he could defend himself against it. On the counter near Daniel's elbow, there was no bottle, no beer can near the sink, no open recycling bin. The kitchen was clean in a way that looked natural unless a man was looking for proof. Walter was looking. He hated that he was looking. He made himself look at the window instead, at the strip of backyard where evening gathered in the corners of the fence. A bird hopped along the patio chair, pecked at nothing, flew off. Daniel stirred the sauce. After a while, he said, "You still have that tape?" Walter's hand moved under the table before he stopped it. "Yeah." "What's on it?" "Old stuff." Daniel turned the spoon against the side of the pot. "Dad." Walter looked up. Daniel did not sound accusing. That made it harder. "You keep carrying it around," Daniel said. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but it seems like it's not nothing." Walter thought of the recorder on his kitchen table. Frank's voice saying his name. Frank saying love like a tool he had never learned to use right. He thought of Daniel in this kitchen 2 nights ago, saying, "I'm not him, Dad." The truth rose close enough that Walter could feel the shape of it. "It's your grandfather. It's me. It's why I don't know how to be afraid without making someone else feel accused." But Daniel was watching him, and the room was almost peaceful, and Walter was suddenly terrified of breaking it with a dead man's voice. "It's just something I found while packing," he said. Daniel's face changed only a little. Not anger. Disappointment controlled quickly. "Okay." Walter heard the door close in that single word. He should have opened it again. Instead, he nodded toward the stove. "Sauce smells good." Daniel turned back. "Claire made most of it. I'm just not burning it." The evening continued. That was the cruelty of small cowardice. It often allowed dinner to keep cooking. Walter went to the garage 10 minutes later to look for the shelf brackets Daniel said he had bought and misplaced. He went because Daniel asked him to check the workbench, and because being useful steadied him. The garage was attached to the kitchen by a short step down and a door that stuck in damp weather. Walter pulled the cord for the overhead light, and the bulb flickered twice before settling into a weak yellow glow. Daniel's garage was nothing like Frank's had been, nothing like Walter's either. Less order, more life. A bicycle with a flat tire leaned near the mower. A folding table held paint cans, a box of Christmas lights. A bag of potting soil split at one corner. On the wall, Daniel had hung tools on pegboard, but not in any pattern Walter would have chosen. Walter found the shelf brackets near a stack of storage bins. He picked them up, then saw the trash bag. It sat in the corner behind the recycling tote, tied loosely, not full. Something glass pressed against the black plastic, making a hard shape near the bottom. That alone should have meant nothing. Walter stood with the brackets in his hand. The furnace clicked on inside the house. From the kitchen, Daniel called, "Find them?" "Yeah." Walter did not move. The shape inside the bag caught the garage light, a brown curve, a neck, a label partly visible through stretched plastic. His body knew before his mind allowed it. The room narrowed. Not dramatically, not like fainting. More like the old air had been sucked out and replaced with the shed behind his childhood house, hot and full of cut grass. The moment before a father's boots crossed the yard. Walter set the brackets down. He told himself not to touch the bag. He touched it. The plastic crackled under his fingers. The sound was too loud. He loosened the tie and pulled the bag open. A whiskey bottle lay inside, not empty, maybe a quarter left. Beside it were 3 beer cans, crushed flatter than the ones in the kitchen had been, as if someone had wanted them to take up less space or look less like themselves. Walter stared. A bottle in a trash bag. That was all. Not a crime, not proof of ruin, not a son dying in a hospital bed, not a boy with smoke in his hand. He knew that. He knew it and still felt fear rise so fast it became anger before he could name it. Daniel appeared at the garage door. "Dad?" Walter looked over his shoulder. Daniel's eyes went to the open bag. A tiredness passed across his face before the defensiveness came. That was what Walter saw first. Not guilt, not rage. Tiredness. A man caught in a private thing he had hoped not to discuss in fluorescent light, with his father holding evidence like a court exhibit. Walter should have put the bottle down. He picked it up instead. The glass was cool and solid in his hand. "What is this?" Daniel stepped down into the garage. "It looks like a bottle." "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't talk to me like I'm stupid." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then don't hold up trash like you're a detective." The words struck the wrong place. Walter felt shame flash, and because he did not know where to put it, he raised the bottle slightly. "You hit it. I threw it out. In the garage. That's where the trash is. Behind the bin." Daniel looked away once, toward the concrete floor, then back. "Because I didn't want this exact conversation." "So you knew there was something to hide?" "No, I knew you'd make it into something." Walter stepped closer before he realized he had moved. Daniel did not step back. "Not yet." "How much?" Walter asked. Daniel laughed, low and humorless. "Here we go. How much are you drinking?" "We did this already." "And you didn't answer." "I don't owe you inventory. I'm your father. And I'm 50 years old. You're acting like a teenager hiding cans in the garage." Daniel's face went pale with anger. Walter heard himself and still could not stop. The fear had found its track. Once on it, every word came smooth and wrong. "You think I don't know what hiding looks like?" Walter said. "You think I haven't seen men tell everybody they're fine right up until they aren't?" Daniel's voice rose. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it." "I have a drink. Sometimes I have more than one. That's the explanation." "That's not an explanation. That's a dodge." Daniel pointed toward the kitchen. "I am not doing this in my garage." "Where would you like to do it? In the kitchen beside the bottle? Or should I wait until I hear it in your voice again?" Daniel flinched then. Not from the words only, from the bottle. Walter had not noticed his own hand until Daniel's eyes moved to it. He was gripping the neck so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The bottle was raised slightly, not like a weapon, not exactly, but not harmless either. It was a hard thing in a father's hand, proof, judgment, fear made visible. The sight of Daniel's flinch moved through Walter slower than it should have. First, there was irritation, a defensive spark. "I wasn't going to hit you. Don't make this worse than it is." Then the garage light buzzed overhead. Then the bottle's weight became the broom, not in shape, in meaning. His father's hand, the old corn broom, the split handle falling to the grass. Walter at 16 pressing himself against the shed, seeing Frank reach for him and flinching before thought. Now Daniel stood in his own garage, a grown man with sauce simmering in the next room, and something in his face had made itself ready for impact. Not because Walter would hit him, because Walter had brought fear close enough to make the body decide before the mind could. Walter lowered the bottle. The movement felt too late. Daniel's breathing had changed. He looked at Walter, not furious now, worse, wary. "Do you hear yourself?" Daniel asked. The question was quiet. It did more damage than shouting would have. Walter's mouth opened. No answer came. Daniel looked at the bottle again, then at Walter's face. "Do you see what you're doing?" "I wasn't..." "You weren't what? Going to throw it? Smash it? Put it on the counter and make me stand there while you cross-examine me?" Walter's fingers loosened. Daniel took another step back, small but unmistakable. "This is my house," Daniel said. "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Walter set the bottle on the workbench. The glass touched wood with a dull, heavy knock. Daniel flinched again at the sound. Walter closed his eyes. He had slammed it harder than he meant to. The garage went still. From the kitchen, sauce bubbled softly on the stove. Ordinary, domestic, almost cruelly patient. Daniel said, "If you move in here, you don't get to turn my home into a place where I have to hide, defend, explain, and wait for you to decide whether I pass." Walter opened his eyes. Daniel's voice shook now, but he did not look away. "I wanted you here," Daniel said. "I still do, but not like this." Walter gripped the edge of the workbench because, without it, he might have stepped toward his son, and he did not trust what stepping forward would look like. "I'm worried about you," he said. "I believe you." The answer almost broke him. Daniel believed him. That was the worst part. Daniel was not refusing the love. He was refusing what the love turned into. But worry doesn't give you ownership of me. Daniel said. "It doesn't give you the right to search trash bags and hold bottles in my face." Walter swallowed. The words "search trash bags" landed with a hot humiliation. He had done that. He had opened a bag in another man's garage. Not because Daniel invited him to, not because he found a fire, because fear had told him it had permission. Daniel rubbed his forehead, then dropped his hand. "I need you to hear me," he said. "If you come here to control me, you can't come here." The sentence entered Walter cleanly and stayed there. For a moment, he heard Frank's voice from the tape. "I put that fear on him." Walter looked at the bottle on the bench. A quarter of whiskey, 3 beer cans. Enough to worry about, maybe. Enough to ask about, yes. Enough to become Frank over. No. But becoming Frank, he realized, did not begin with a broom. It began earlier, with the certainty that fear made him right. With the belief that love excused the force used to deliver it. With a son's face changing before his father noticed the change. Walter turned away from Daniel and pressed both hands flat on the workbench. The wood was rough under his palms. A screw rolled near his thumb. He focused on that tiny thing because the larger thing was almost too much to stand inside. He had not hit Daniel. That should have comforted him. It did not. Because Daniel had still flinched. Walter's voice came out low. "I'm sorry." Daniel did not answer immediately. Walter kept his eyes on the workbench. "I am," he said, and hated how thin it sounded beside what had just happened. Daniel breathed out. "I don't know what to do with that right now." Walter nodded once. Fair. That was fair. He could not ask forgiveness as a way to avoid consequence. Frank had spent years not asking at all, and Walter had spent years turning that absence into armor. He would not use sorry as another tool to move his son where he wanted him. Daniel stepped toward the door to the kitchen. "I'm going to turn off the stove," he said. "All right. You should go home tonight." Walter felt the sentence in his chest. "All right," he said again. Daniel stopped in the doorway but did not turn fully back. "And Dad?" Walter looked up. Daniel's face was tired, hurt, and older than Walter wanted it to be. "I'm not saying I don't need help," Daniel said. "I'm saying I can't get it from someone who makes me feel small." Then he went inside. Walter stayed in the garage. The bottle sat on the workbench beside the brackets, both things absurdly ordinary now. A bottle. A piece of hardware. A man's fear. A son's boundary. Walter picked up the bottle carefully, not by the neck this time, but around the body with both hands, as if it might contain something breakable besides glass. He put it back in the trash bag. He did not tie the bag. He had no right to hide what he had uncovered. Then he found the small box he had brought and carried it from the hallway. Daniel was in the kitchen with his back turned, one hand on the stove knob, the other braced on the counter. The sauce had stopped bubbling. The room smelled of garlic and something slightly burned at the bottom of the pot. Walter did not go in. He stood at the edge of the doorway. "I'll take this back tonight," he said. Daniel looked over his shoulder. His eyes went to the box. "You don't have to take everything, just this one." Daniel did not ask why. Walter was grateful and ashamed. He drove home with the box on the passenger seat and the wrapped cassette inside it. At the old house, he did not turn on the living room lamp. He went straight to the kitchen, set the box on the table, and stood over it in the dark for a while, before unwrapping the cassette. The dish towel fell open. The tape lay there, patient and mute. Frank had waited too long. That was what Walter understood now. Not as an idea, but as a fact with weight. Frank had waited until his words were trapped in plastic, until the boy had become a man, until apology could only arrive as a ghost. Walter put one hand on the cassette. For the first time, he did not think, "I need to understand my father." He thought, "Daniel needs to hear me while I am still alive." Not someday. Not after the move. Not after the fear became another broken thing in another family's garage. Now. Chapter 6, A House with a Voice in It. Walter left the moving boxes in the truck. That was the first promise he made, though no one heard it but him. He sat outside Daniel's house, with the engine off and both hands resting on the steering wheel. The evening had come down soft and blue over the neighborhood. Porch lights glowed one by one. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and gave up. In Daniel's front window, the kitchen light was on. Walter did not bring clothes. He did not bring tools. He did not bring another box marked MISC, because almost everything left in his life now seemed to fit that word. He brought only the cassette player and the tape. They sat beside him on the passenger seat, wrapped in the same dish towel he had used the night before. The towel made the bundle look gentler than it was, a thing for a potluck, a loaf of bread, something a man might carry into his son's house without changing the shape of the evening. Walter knew better. He had rehearsed 3 different openings on the drive over. All of them sounded wrong by the time he reached Daniel's street. I need to explain something. Too formal. I found something from your grandfather. Too easy to hide behind Frank. I'm sorry. True, but not enough by itself. He looked at the front door. The last time he stood in Daniel's garage, his son had flinched. Walter had not slept much after that. He had sat in the old kitchen until morning, listening not to the tape, but to the house emptying around him. Every creak sounded like a question. Every box looked like evidence. He had spent so many years believing he was not his father because he had never raised a hand to Daniel. Then Daniel's face in the garage had taught him how low the bar had been. A man did not have to swing a broom to make his son brace for harm. Walter picked up the bundle and got out. Daniel opened the door before Walter knocked twice. He looked tired, not hungover, not sloppy, just tired in the ordinary way of men who had been carrying too much and calling it normal. He wore jeans and an old gray sweatshirt. His hair was damp, as if he had showered after work and then stood too long deciding whether that helped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel's eyes dropped to the bundle. Walter held it with both hands. I didn't bring more boxes, he said. Daniel looked back at him. All right, I'm not here to check anything. Daniel's expression did not soften. Okay? Walter swallowed. The porch light hummed above them. A moth tapped itself against the glass shade, tiny and persistent. I need to say something while I'm alive, Walter said. Daniel went very still. Walter heard the sentence after he said it and almost hated himself for the drama of it. But it was the truth. Awkward, heavy, badly wrapped. Still the truth. Daniel stepped aside. Come in. The kitchen was clean. Too clean, maybe. Counters wiped, sink empty, recycling bin tucked away. No bottle by the sink, no cans visible. Daniel had not made coffee. He had not put food out. He had not prepared comfort. Good, Walter thought. Comfort could wait. He set the cassette player on the kitchen table. Then he unwrapped the tape and placed it beside the machine. Daniel remained standing near the counter. What is it? He asked. My father's voice. Daniel's face changed. Just a little. Frank? Walter nodded. I found it in the garage at the house when I was packing. Daniel looked at the cassette, as if it had become less an object and more a person who had entered the room without permission. What does he say? Walter pulled out a chair but did not sit. Sitting felt too easy. Too much like claiming space before he had earned it. He talks about me, Walter said, and about when I was 16. Daniel waited. Walter looked down at the tape. There was a summer, 1980, I tried a cigarette behind the shed. Daniel's eyes flicked up. Walter gave a small, humorless breath. I know, one cigarette doesn't sound like much. No, Daniel said carefully. Well, it doesn't. To my father it was. Walter rubbed his thumb along the edge of the chair back. His father died of lung cancer. Frank watched it happen. He never talked about it, right? But it scared him worse than anything. So when he caught me smoking, he saw not a dumb kid, not curiosity. He saw a hospital bed. Daniel's guardedness did not vanish, but it shifted. Walter could see him listening despite himself. He hit me, Walter said. The words came plainly. They did not need help. Daniel's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. With a broom, Walter added, until it broke. Daniel looked down. For several seconds, the kitchen held only the hum of the refrigerator and the small mechanical tick of the wall clock. Walter waited. He had learned, too late but not too late for this, that silence did not always have to be filled by the father first. Daniel said, Did Grandma know? She saw enough. Did he ever apologize? Walter looked at the cassette. Not to my face. Daniel understood then. Walter watched it arrive. Not all at once. First confusion, then anger on Walter's behalf. Then something more complicated when his eyes returned to the tape. He recorded it? Some of it, that night, or close to it. Walter touched the machine lightly, then drew his hand back. He said things into this that he couldn't say to me. Daniel's jaw worked once. And you found it now? Yeah. When you're moving in with me? Yeah. Daniel let out a short breath. It was not laughter. Dad. I know. No, I don't think you do. Walter looked up. Daniel's voice was controlled, but there was strain beneath it. I need to know this isn't you coming here with some sad story, so I stop being mad. The words landed hard. Walter accepted that they should. It isn't. Because I can feel sorry for what happened to you and still not be okay with what happened in my garage. I know. Do you? Yes. Daniel stared at him for a moment longer, searching for the old argument, the old defense, the place where Walter would turn worry into authority. Walter gave him none. At last, Daniel pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Not relaxed, but there. Walter sat too. The cassette player looked small between them, old gray plastic under the kitchen light. Walter pressed the tape into place. His fingers shook once. He let Daniel see it. He did not hide the tremor by turning away or making a joke. He pressed play. At first there was only hiss. Daniel looked at the machine. Then Frank Bennett's voice entered Daniel's kitchen. "Well," Frank said, rough and close, "I don't know if this thing's even taking." Daniel's eyes lifted to Walter's face. Walter kept his gaze on the table. "Mary says I ought to say it out loud. Says maybe a man can hear himself better that way." The kitchen seemed to grow older around the voice. The cabinets, the stove, the clean counter, the life Daniel had built, all of it held still while a dead man spoke from another kitchen. Another night, another failure. Walter's been smoking. Daniel did not move. The tape rolled on. Frank spoke of his father in the hospital, of breath rattling like a busted engine, of seeing death in Walter's hand instead of a cigarette. His voice broke once and recovered badly. He said he had been scared. He said he had put that fear on Walter. Walter kept his hands flat on his knees. He did not watch Daniel during the worst of it. That felt like another kind of control, to study his son's reaction and decide whether it was enough. So he listened with him. When Frank's voice said, "I shouldn't have used the broom," Daniel looked away. His mouth tightened. Walter heard the small sound his son made through his nose. Not a sob, not yet. Something held back because men in their family had been holding back for 3 generations and calling it composure. Then came the later part. Frank saying Walter had looked at him like he was the thing the boy needed protection from. Frank saying love was not enough if a boy was scared of you. Frank saying Walter's name. Walter. Daniel lowered his head. "I love you," Frank said through static and time. "I don't know how to say that, so it sounds right. Maybe it don't, coming after what I did. But it's true." Walter closed his eyes. He had heard it before. It still found a new place to hurt. The tape clicked off. No one moved. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding across the window and disappearing. Daniel wiped one hand over his face and sat back. "God," he said quietly. Walter nodded once. Daniel looked at him. "How long did you carry that?" "The broom?" "All of it." Walter thought about lying in the old way, making the wounds smaller so nobody had to change around it. Then he said, "Longer than I knew." Daniel's eyes were wet, but his face remained guarded. "I'm sorry," he said. Walter shook his head. "You don't have to take care of me right now." Daniel blinked. Walter leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I didn't bring this so you'd feel bad for me. I brought it because Frank waited too long." He said the things after. "Into a machine. I heard them 40 years later. And last night I kept thinking..." His voice tightened. He stopped. Daniel waited. Walter forced himself not to dress the sentence up. "I kept thinking you shouldn't have to find my truth after I'm dead." Daniel looked down at the table. Walter's hands were clasped now, not tightly enough to look like prayer, but close. "I am scared," Walter said, "about the drinking. I won't lie about that." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Walter saw it and slowed down. "But being scared doesn't give me the right to search your trash. It doesn't give me the right to hold a bottle like proof. It doesn't give me the right to make you feel small in your own house." Daniel swallowed. Walter looked at his son directly. "I love you," he said. The words did not come smoothly. They came like something old being pulled through a narrow place. "I love you, and I am afraid of losing you. But I don't get to use that fear to control you." Daniel covered his mouth with one hand. Walter kept going because stopping now would be easier, and easier had hurt them enough. "I don't want to be the thing you have to protect yourself from." Daniel shut his eyes. There it was. The sentence had crossed the table and found him. Walter did not reach for him. He wanted to. His hand almost moved. He held it still. Daniel opened his eyes again. For a while, he said nothing. Then he pushed back his chair and stood. Walter's stomach dropped. Daniel walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, rinsed a glass that was already clean, and set it in the rack. A useless action. A necessary one. When he turned back, his voice was rough. "I don't know how bad it is." Walter nodded slowly. Daniel looked irritated by his own honesty. "I mean, I don't wake up and drink. I don't miss work. I'm not..." He stopped as if hearing himself building a case. "But I hide it." Walter remained quiet. Daniel looked toward the garage door. "I hide the bottles because I don't want Claire to look tired. I hide them because I don't want you to ask. I hide them because if nobody sees it, then it's just how I get through a day." The kitchen seemed to listen. Daniel laughed once, barely. "That sounds bad when I say it out loud." "It sounds honest." Daniel looked at him sharply. Walter lifted both hands a little, not approval, just honest. Daniel leaned back against the counter. "I'm ashamed," he said. Walter felt the sentence in his chest. Not because it surprised him, because Daniel had said it. "I come home and I'm angry before anything even happens," Daniel continued. "Work, bills, Claire trying to be patient, you needing help and pretending you don't need help. Then I feel guilty for being angry. Then I drink so I don't feel guilty. Then I hide it and feel worse." He looked at Walter. "I didn't want you to see that." Walter's voice came softly. "I know something about not wanting a son to see the worst part. Daniel's face tightened again, but not in defense now. In pain. Walter said, I can listen. I can help if you ask me. I can be scared and still listen. Daniel studied him. You're not going to tell me what to do? Walter almost smiled, but it would have been too easy, too soon. I'm 71, he said. I'm sure I'll be tempted. A short breath left Daniel, almost a laugh, almost grief. But no, Walter said, not tonight. Daniel nodded. Then he went to the cabinet above the refrigerator. Walter did not turn to watch every movement. He kept his eyes on the cassette player until Daniel set a bottle on the counter. Then another from under the sink. Then 2 beers from the back of the fridge. Not a shocking amount. Enough. Daniel stood there with them gathered in front of him. I don't want this in the house right now, he said. Walter said nothing. Daniel glanced at him. I mean, I'm not making some big speech. I don't know what this looks like yet. Maybe I talk to someone. Maybe I tell Claire the whole thing instead of half of it. Maybe I don't keep it here where I can lie about it. That sounds like a start. It is a start, Daniel said. And there was the first spark of his old impatience, but it did not cut the same way. Walter nodded. All right. Daniel picked up the bottles. Then he stopped. Can you... He looked frustrated by the request before it was finished. Can you sit there? Just sit there while I do this. Walter's throat tightened. Yes. So Walter sat. He did not follow Daniel to the garage. He did not count bottles. He did not listen for glass. He did not ask if there was more. He sat at the kitchen table with the dead man's cassette between his hands while his living son made a choice in another room. When Daniel came back, his eyes were red. He washed his hands at the sink, longer than necessary. Then he came to the table and sat down. Neither of them called it victory. That would have made it too small. After a while, Daniel touched the cassette player with one finger. Do you want to keep it here? He asked. Walter looked at him. I don't know. Daniel nodded. Maybe not hidden, though. No, Walter said, not hidden. 3 weeks later, Walter moved in on a Saturday with rain threatening, but never falling. Daniel borrowed a dolly from a neighbor. Claire labeled shelves in the hallway closet with blue painter's tape, then laughed at herself and pulled half the labels down before Walter could comment. Walter brought too many tools and fewer boxes than Daniel expected. The drill press stayed behind with a man from 2 streets over who promised to use it, not sell it. The first night was awkward. Of course it was. Walter did not know where Daniel kept extra trash bags. Daniel forgot Walter hated the hallway light left on. Claire made chili and burned the cornbread because everyone kept trying too hard to be easy. But nobody pretended the awkwardness meant failure. After dinner, Daniel made tea. Not coffee, tea because Walter had admitted coffee after 3 really did keep him awake, and Daniel had said, miracles happen. Walter sat in the living room in the armchair they had moved from his old house. It looked smaller here, or maybe he did. The boxes were not all unpacked. Mary's photograph sat on the dresser in his room, not yet angled right. His radio got 2 stations clearly, and one that came in only when the antenna leaned against the lamp. From the kitchen came the sound of cabinets opening and closing. Walter's body answered before his mind did. The old urge rose, to listen harder, to identify the cabinet, to wonder whether Daniel was searching for something hidden, to stand casually as if he only needed water. Walter kept his hands on the arms of the chair. The house did not require him to patrol it. A soft clink sounded, then footsteps. Daniel came in carrying 2 mugs, one in each hand. He handed the darker one to Walter. No ice, Daniel said. In tea? I'm just covering my bases. Walter took the mug. The warmth settled into his palms. On the small shelf beside the family photographs sat the cassette player. Daniel had put it there that afternoon, not like a shrine, not like a punishment, just among the living things. Mary's picture, Daniel and Claire at Niagara Falls, a school photo of Daniel with missing front teeth, Frank's old cassette player, its cord wrapped neatly behind it, the tape resting on top, a voice in the house, not hidden in a garage, not waiting for death. Daniel sat on the sofa and blew across his tea. For a while, they watched nothing in particular on the muted television while rain finally began to touch the windows. Walter looked toward the kitchen once. The light was on. The counters were clear. A dish towel hung over the oven handle. No bottle on the table. No test to pass. No proof to gather. Daniel caught him looking. Not sharply. Just saw him. Walter met his son's eyes. Then he looked back at his mug. He did not stand. Daniel leaned back into the sofa, and after a minute, he said, Tomorrow I'll show you where the trash bags are. Walter nodded. Tomorrow, he said. The rain softened against the glass. The old house was gone from him now in the way houses go. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. Its rooms would live in him, along with the garage, the tape, the broken broom, the father who had loved badly and spoken too late. But here in Daniel's living room, with tea warming his hands and his son sitting close enough to hear without being watched, Walter understood something quietly. He had not been taken in. He had come home.